Imagine you haven't eaten in 3 days. The herd moved south a week ago, and you stayed too long. You know you have to follow, and you know the way, and then the sky goes white. Not a gentle flurry, a hard, sideways snow that comes with a wind that cuts straight through you, and it doesn't stop. It falls all day, then all night, then the next morning, and it's still coming. So now you can't travel. You can't see the landmarks you'd memorized because the snow has erased them. You can't move through the open because the drifts are waist deep and hide the rocks and the cracks in the ice. And one bad step means a broken leg, and a broken leg out here means death. The snow is burying the mouth of your shelter, and the fire, the one thing keeping you warm, keeping your fingers working, keeping you alive, is fighting for air as the cold presses in from every direction. You're not restless, you're buried alive with a heartbeat. For most of human history, snow wasn't a pretty thing to watch out the window. It was a sentence. And what ancient humans did while they waited it out might matter more than anything they did under a clear winter sky. Heck, today, when it snows, you turn up the heat, make some cocoa, maybe pull a blanket off the shelf, and open Netflix. You watch the flakes stack up on the sill, and it feels like a gift, a day off, a reason to stay in. For you, snow is a mood. It makes you feel cozy. It makes everything quiet. It makes you sleepy. But for a human being 40,000 years ago, that same snow, the exact same silence you find so peaceful, could kill you in 3 different ways before it stopped falling. The first one is cold, obviously, but not the way you think. The real killer wasn't the temperature, it was the wet. Snow melts against a warm body, and a damp human in freezing wind loses heat so fast that hypothermia can set in within an hour. Without tailored clothing, without a sealed shelter, a person could go from shivering to confused to dead between one sunrise and the next. The second one is starvation, and this is the cruel part. Snow doesn't just make you cold, it hides the food. Buried plants, buried tracks, animals gone still and far away. A long snow could seal off an entire landscape's calories at exactly the moment your body was burning them fastest just to stay warm. Archaeologists studying Ice Age populations find seasons of near starvation written right into the bones and teeth, lines of arrested growth from winters that went on too long. And the third one, the quiet one, is the whiteout itself. Snow blindness from the glare, disorientation in a world with no edges and no shadows, people wandering 100 meters from a shelter they could no longer see, and freezing within sight of safety they'd never find. So snow didn't just make life harder, it shrank the world down to the size of a single warm room and locked the door. And in the middle of that, one job mattered more than everything else: keeping the fire alive. And here's why that was so terrifying in winter specifically. Wet wood doesn't want to burn, and in deep snow, dry wood is almost impossible to find. Everything is soaked, everything is frozen, everything is buried. Losing your fire in summer was a serious problem. Losing it in a snowstorm was often a death sentence for the whole group, because you might have no way to make another. When they found Ötzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old man frozen into an alpine glacier, he was carrying a complete fire kit in his belt pouch. Tinder fungus, flint, iron pyrite for striking sparks, and dry plant tinder wrapped up as backup. Even 5,000 years ago, a man crossing high country in the cold knew that fire was the difference between arriving and vanishing, and he carried dedicated equipment to protect it. So when the snow came, the first priority wasn't food and it wasn't sleep. It was the fire. Pull it deeper into the shelter, away from the wind driving in through the entrance. Bank it with stones that would hold the heat long after the flames died down. Feed it carefully. Split open frozen logs to reach the dry heartwood inside. Break the dead lower branches off pine trees where the canopy kept them sheltered. Save every scrap of fat, because animal fat burns hot and slow and doesn't care that it's freezing outside. One person's entire job during a blizzard might have been nothing but sitting beside that fire for hours, shielding it, feeding it, refusing to let it die. Because that fire was warmth, light, cooked food, melted drinking water, and the beating center of everything the group was. Alright, so the fire's holding and you're not freezing, but you cannot leave. So what do? You make the things that will keep you alive through the rest of the winter. And in the cold, the single most important thing you can make is clothing. Not draped hides, sewn, fitted, layered clothing. And that is a technology as much as any stone blade. It starts with the bone needle, a delicate, precise tool with a tiny drilled eye, appearing in the record more than 40,000 years ago and spreading everywhere the cold went. You cannot carve a bone needle while you're running or hunting. You make it sitting still, close to the light, with hours to give it, and then you use it. At a site called Sungir in Russia, dating to roughly 34,000 years ago, archaeologists found burials so richly decorated that they could reconstruct the clothing from the pattern of thousands of ivory beads sewn onto it. Fitted caps, long shirts, trousers, and footwear, tailored close to the body to trap heat. That is not survival by accident. That is engineering. Someone sat through the long dark of an Ice Age winter and stitched a garment designed, seam by seam, to defeat the cold. And it wasn't only clothing. The archaeological record of cold climate shelters is packed with the evidence of people working with their hands through the dead of winter. Stone tools shaped in every stage, piles of the tiny chips that fly off when you nap flint, concentrated in the exact spots where someone would sit near the firelight and work. At Mezhyrich in Ukraine around 15,000 years ago, people built entire dwellings out of mammoth bones, hundreds of them, carefully interlocked, some arranged in patterns that were clearly about more than just holding up a roof. Building that and maintaining it was slow, patient, indoor work. It was winter work. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Once you're warm and fed and your hands are moving, something happens that has nothing to do with survival at all: the art. The painted caves of Ice Age Europe, Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, hold images 30,000 to 36,000 years old of the exact animals people were hunting through the cold. Horses, bison, lions, woolly rhinos, drawn with a skill that still stops people in their tracks. The artists understood anatomy, movement, weight. Some of the animals are caught mid-stride, muscles tensed, breath almost visible. These aren't scratches. They're the work of people who watched these animals for thousands of hours and then rebuilt them from memory, deep underground, by the light of burning fat. And think about when you do that. Not on the rare, clear winter day when the tracks were fresh and the hunting was good. You'd be outside. You'd carve a lamp full of animal fat, carry it into total darkness, crawl through passages hundreds of meters into the rock, and paint when you could not go outside. When the snow had been falling for days and you'd already sharpened every tool and mended every seam, and there was nothing left to do but go deeper into the dark and make something that had never existed before. We can't prove that cave art was a winter activity, but the logic holds. The greatest creative explosion in human prehistory happened in the coldest places, among the people most likely to be sealed inside for weeks at a time. And that leads to something even bigger. Snow didn't just create art, it might have created culture itself. Think about what happens when 15 or 30 people are packed into a single warm space for weeks with nowhere to go. You talk, you listen, you share. In a study of fireside talk among the Jew/Hawanzi people of the Kalahari, anthropologist Polly Wisner found that daytime conversation was mostly practical: resources, complaints, plans. But at night, around the fire, more than 80% of the talk turned to stories, songs, and the people who came before. Firelight changed what people spoke about. It softened faces, eased tension, opened people up. And the long dark of winter was firelight stretched across weeks. The knowledge moving around that fire wasn't small talk. It was where the herds go in the cold. Which frozen berries are safe? How to read the surface of a river to know if the ice will hold your weight. That's not idle chatter. That's survival passing from one brain into another through nothing but a voice in the dark. And then, past the practical, there was the rest of it. The stories, the myths, the explanations for where the sun goes in winter and why it always comes back. Every ancient culture that lived with real winter built stories about the return of the light, and someone invented those stories, almost certainly while sitting in the exact darkness the story was made to survive. The oldest verified oral traditions on Earth, Australian Aboriginal accounts of coastlines that drowned 7,000 years ago, prove that stories told and retold around a fire can carry true knowledge across 300 generations. That kind of memory doesn't form unless people spend enormous stretches of time doing exactly that, sitting together, retelling the same story until it's carved into everyone who hears it. And winter gave them that time by the month. Now here's the part nobody expects. Snow wasn't only the enemy. Sometimes it was the best hunting condition on Earth. Fresh snow is a blank page, and every animal that crosses it signs its name. You can see exactly what walked past, how big it was, how long ago, and which way it was heading, with a clarity you never get on bare ground. Deep snow slows heavy prey and exhausts it, while a human on the right gear stays on top and keeps moving. Cold preserves meat too. A single large kill in winter didn't rot, it froze, and a frozen carcass was a storehouse that could feed a group for weeks if they could keep the scavengers off it. Snow was also water you didn't have to walk to. You could melt it at the fire and never risk the open in search of a spring. And the animals people needed most in the cold, the mammoths, the reindeer, the horses, were fat and thick-coated in winter, worth more per kill than at any other time of year. The groups who understood all of this, who could read the snow instead of just fearing it, held an enormous advantage over the ones who couldn't. So, what did ancient humans do when it snowed for days? Everything that mattered. They kept the fire alive when the whole frozen world was trying to kill it. They made the tools they'd use for the next hunt. They stitched the fitted clothing that was the only reason a human could live or the ice did it all. They built and mended the shelters that held the warmth in. They ground the pigment and crawled into the dark and painted animals on stone by firelight. They told the stories that carried survival across generations and gave the long night a meaning. And when the snow finally stopped, they walked out onto a fresh white page covered in perfect tracks and got back to work. Snow didn't slow them down. It gave them the time to become the kind of creature that could survive it. Every needle, every fur-lined coat, every mammoth-bone wall, every story about the returning sun, every painting deep in the freezing dark. All of it came from the time when they couldn't go out and had nothing to do but sit close to the fire and think. Boredom didn't exist for them the way it does for you. Because when you're sealed in against a storm that wants you dead, and your survival depends on what your hands can make before the fire burns down, you don't get bored. You get inventive. And that might be the single biggest reason we made it through the ice at all.